Welcome, dear viewers. For more exclusive, thrilling stories every week, join our membership. Sit back, relax, and sip your coffee. Enjoy. The main feature in the old tavern room is the wall, riddled with what they say are Jesse James's bullet holes. Most nights, they're just dark little circles in the plaster. But sometimes, when you're closing up, you'll see a new one. A fresh, dark hole that wasn't there an hour ago. The owner, a quiet woman named Mary, showed me what to do. You don't patch it. You take a single unspent bullet from the box she keeps under the bar, and you gently push it into the new hole until it's snug. She just told me, sometimes a fella just needs to get his shot back. It's best not to keep what ain't yours. My name's Caleb Hutchins, and 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed any of this. Hell, 6 months ago I was selling insurance in Louisville, wearing ties that cost more than I make in a week now, driving a leased BMW down Bardstown Road, thinking I had my life figured out. Then the divorce papers came. Then the company downsized. Then my dad's cancer diagnosis cleaned out what was left of my savings account. Bardstown wasn't my first choice for a fresh start. It wasn't even my 10th. But when you're 34 with a busted credit score, and your only reference is a supervisor who got laid off same day you did, you take what you can get. The ad in the Kentucky Standard was simple. Night desk clerk needed. Old Talbott Tavern. Experience preferred but not required. Must be comfortable working alone. The tavern sits on North 3rd Street like a tired old man who's seen too much but keeps going anyway. Built in 1779, the brochures say. Oldest stagecoach, stop west of the Alleghenies. Abraham Lincoln slept here. So did Daniel Boone. And Jesse James, obviously, though he left his mark in a different way. Mary Whitfield runs the place now. 3rd generation, she told me during my interview, though she looks like she could be 5th or 6th with those deep lines around her eyes and hair gone silver before its time. She's got that Kentucky drawl that makes everything sound like wisdom, even when she's telling you where they keep the spare toilet paper. "You ever worked nights before, Caleb?" she asked, looking over my resume with its gaping 3-month hole. "Some, back in college." "This ain't college." She folded the paper and studied my face. "Folks check in here because they want to feel history, you understand? But history's got layers. Some of them you can put in a pamphlet. Others..." She gestured toward the tavern room where shadows gathered in corners that seemed too deep for the space they occupied. "Others you just learn to live with." I should have asked what she meant. Should have pressed for details when she walked me through my duties and kept pausing at certain spots. The staircase to the 2nd floor, the door marked private behind the front desk, the old well in the courtyard that guests weren't allowed near after sunset. Instead, I said yes. $12 an hour to sit behind a wooden desk, older than Kentucky's statehood, checking in the occasional ghost tour group or Bourbon Trail tourist who'd booked one of the 7 guest rooms upstairs. Easy money, I thought. The first week was easy money. Week 2, I started noticing things. By week 3, Mary sat me down with a cup of coffee that tasted like it was brewed with creek water and handed me a folded piece of paper. "Time you learned the real job," she said. The paper felt heavier than it should have. Handwritten in blue ink, the kind that comes from a fountain pen your grandmother might have used. Mary's handwriting was neat, careful, like she'd copied these words many times before. "Read it twice," she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Ask questions if you need to, but understand, these aren't suggestions, Caleb. They're the difference between going home each morning and not going home at all. Rule 1. Never enter the tavern room after 2 a.m. unless you hear the bell ring 3 times. If it rings once or twice, ignore it completely. Rule 2. If a guest asks for room 7, tell them it's occupied, even if it appears empty, especially if it appears empty. Rule 3. The well in the courtyard is off limits to guests after dark. If you find someone near it past sunset, escort them inside immediately. Do not let them drink from it under any circumstances. Rule 4. Should you see a woman in a blue dress on the stairs, nod politely and continue about your business. Do not speak to her. Do not follow her. I looked up. A woman in a blue dress. Mary's fingers drummed against her coffee mug. Rebecca. She's been here longer than any of us. Longer than the building, some say. She's harmless if you mind your manners. Rebecca. I repeated the name, testing how it felt. And she just walks around. She's looking for someone. Has been for about 200 years now. Best to let her look in peace. Mary stood, brushing wrinkles from her skirt. There were 4 more rules, but let's see how you handle these first. She headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Caleb. The coffee pot in the kitchen. It'll turn itself on around 3:30 most nights. That's normal. But if you smell bacon cooking, don't go looking for the source. Just let it be. The door closed with a soft click, leaving me alone with the rules and questions I didn't know how to ask. Tuesday night was quiet. A single guest, a Bourbon Trail tourist from Michigan, checked into room 3 around 9 p.m. He asked about local restaurants, bought a bottle of water from the vending machine, and disappeared upstairs. The kind of normal interaction that made me wonder if Mary was playing an elaborate prank on the new guy. The tavern room bell sat silent on its shelf, a tarnished brass thing that looked like it belonged in a ship's wheelhouse. I found myself glancing at it every few minutes, which was ridiculous. Bells don't ring by themselves. At 11:47 p.m., I heard footsteps on the stairs. Slow, measured steps, like someone taking their time. I looked up from the crossword puzzle I'd been working on, expecting to see the Michigan tourist heading out for a late dinner. Instead, a woman in a blue dress descended the staircase. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to long skirts and narrow stairs. Her dress was simple. Cotton, maybe, with small buttons up the front and sleeves that ended at her wrists. Her hair was pinned up in a style that wouldn't have looked out of place in a Civil War photograph. Our eyes met for a moment. Hers were dark, sad in a way that seemed to stretch back generations. I remembered Mary's instruction and nodded politely. Rebecca, because it had to be Rebecca, returned the gesture with a small smile before continuing down the stairs and disappearing through the wall beside the front door. Through the wall. Not around it. Through it. I sat there for a long time, pen frozen over 14 across, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. The alternative was admitting that my new job came with a 200-year-old ghost, and I wasn't ready for that conversation with myself. The coffee pot started brewing at 3:31 a.m., just like Mary said it would. I could hear it gurgling and hissing from the kitchen, a comforting sound that reminded me of Saturday mornings at my grandmother's house in Elizabethtown. Normal, explainable. Then I smelled bacon. Not the thin, crispy kind you get at restaurants, but thick-cut, home-cured bacon like my uncle used to make on his farm outside Hodgenville. The smell drifted through the lobby, rich and smoky, making my stomach growl despite the turkey sandwich I'd eaten around midnight. I stood up, took 3 steps toward the kitchen, then remembered Mary's warning. "Let it be," she'd said. "Don't go looking." Instead, I returned to my desk and pretended to focus on the crossword. The bacon smell faded after 20 minutes, leaving behind only the lingering aroma of coffee and questions I didn't want answered. Nothing else happened that night. The Michigan tourist came down at 7 a.m., checked out without incident, and tipped me $5 for the authentic atmosphere. If only he knew. Mary arrived at 7:30 with a box of donuts from Hearst Drugs and a thermos of coffee that actually tasted like coffee. "How'd it go?" she asked, settling behind the desk while I gathered my things. "Quiet. Saw Rebecca around midnight. Coffee pot started up at 3:30 and..." I hesitated. I smelled bacon cooking, but I didn't go looking. Mary's expression softened. "Good. That's very good, Caleb. Shows you can follow directions." She pulled out a fresh piece of paper. "Ready for the rest?" I looked at the folded sheet, knowing that whatever was written there would make my life more complicated. But the pay was decent, the work wasn't hard, and despite everything, I found myself curious about what other secrets the old tavern kept. "Yeah," I said, taking the paper. "I'm ready." Outside, Bardstown was waking up. Traffic moved along North 3rd Street, heading toward the distilleries and tourist shops that kept the town alive. Normal people starting normal days, unaware that one of their historic landmarks came with its own set of supernatural house rules. I envied them their ignorance. The remaining rules were written in the same careful handwriting, but the ink looked darker, like Mary had pressed harder with her pen. Rule 5. If the grandfather clock in the lobby stops at 3:17, wind it immediately. Count 12 full turns, no more, no less. If it stops again that same night, leave it be and do not look at its face until sunrise. Rule 6. Should guests complain about children laughing in the halls, apologize and offer them earplugs from the drawer. Do not investigate the laughter. Do not mention that no children are currently staying in the tavern. Rule 7. The door marked "Private" behind your desk leads to the basement. If you hear knocking from behind it, respond with 3 knocks of your own, then wait exactly 60 seconds before opening it. Never open it if you hear scratching instead of knocking. Rule 8. If Jesse James appears in the tavern room, offer him a drink. Bourbon, meat. He'll leave a silver dollar on the bar when he's finished. Add the coin to the collection in the safe, but count the total first. If there are ever 13 coins, call this number immediately. Below the last rule, Mary had written a phone number with a 502 area code. "Jesse James," I said aloud, looking up at her. "The actual Jesse James." Mary was reorganizing the guest registration cards, but her hands had gone still. "The very same, though he's different than you might expect. Quieter, more polite. Death has a way of settling a man's temper." "How often does he?" "Not often. Maybe 3-4 times a year. Usually around the anniversary of when he stayed here alive, back in '78. September mostly." She glanced at the calendar on the wall. We were 2 weeks into October. You probably won't see him for a while yet. I folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet next to the first set of rules. "Mary, can I ask you something?" "You can ask." "How long have you been doing this? Running this place, I mean. Dealing with all of this." Her laugh came out tired. "My grandmother started here in 1952. She passed the job to my mother in '81, and my mother passed it to me in 2003. The Whitfield women. We've got a sort of understanding with the spirits here. They leave our families alone. We make sure their needs are met." "What happens if the needs aren't met?" Mary's expression darkened. "You don't want to know, Caleb. Trust me on that." Thursday night brought my first real test. A family from Indiana checked in around 8 p.m. Jim and Linda Patterson with their twin boys, maybe 10 years old. They'd booked 2 adjoining rooms for a long weekend of bourbon trail touring, while the kids stayed entertained with the authentic historical experience the tavern's website promised. The boys, Tyler and Mason, were fascinated by the bullet holes in the tavern room wall. They kept asking if they could touch them, if Jesse James was really as mean as the movies made him seem, if there were any ghosts in the building. The building's got a lot of history, I told them, which was true enough, but it's perfectly safe. Their parents disappeared to their room around 10 p.m. after securing promises that the boys would be in bed by 11. I watched Tyler and Mason head upstairs, noting they'd been assigned rooms 4 and 5, not room 7. Good. At 11:47 p.m., the same time I'd seen Rebecca 2 nights earlier, I heard children laughing in the upstairs hallway. High, bright laughter that echoed off the old wooden floors and filtered down through the lobby. It sounded like kids playing tag, or maybe hide and seek, running between rooms and bumping into walls. I grabbed the phone and dialed room 4. Jim Patterson answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mr. Patterson, I'm sorry to bother you, but could you check on Tyler and Mason? We've had some noise complaints." Silence. Then, "What noise?" "The boys have been asleep for an hour." The laughter continued above us, joined now by the sound of small feet running across floorboards. Could you maybe peek in on them? Make sure they're in their beds?" More silence. Then muffled conversation as Jim spoke to his wife, followed by the sound of doors opening and closing. "They're both sound asleep," Jim said when he came back to the phone. "Tyler snoring like a freight train. Has been since he went down." The running footsteps stopped. The laughter faded to whispers, then to nothing. "I apologize for the disturbance, Mr. Patterson. Sometimes the old building settles in ways that sound like kids playing. I'll make a note in your file for a discount on breakfast." After I hung up, I opened the drawer beside my chair and found a small box of foam earplugs. I made a mental note to offer them to the Pattersons in the morning, just in case. The grandfather clock chose that moment to stop working. The pendulum froze mid-swing at exactly 3:17 a.m., just like Rule 5 warned it might. The sudden silence felt heavy, like the building itself was holding its breath. I walked over to the clock, a massive walnut thing that stood taller than me. The key hung on a small hook beside the face. 12 turns, Mary had said. No more, no less. The mechanism resisted at first, then gave way with a series of clicks and whirs. I counted carefully. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 12. The pendulum started swinging again, and the familiar tick-tock resumed. But as I turned away, the clock stopped again. This time, I didn't wind it. This time, I kept my eyes fixed on the floor and walked back to my desk without looking at the clock face. Rule 5 was clear about what to do if it stopped twice in one night. The silence stretched until dawn, when the first rays of sunlight crept through the lobby windows and the clock resumed its normal rhythm. Friday night was when things got serious. I was reading a paperback novel, something about a detective in Louisville tracking down a serial killer, when I heard the first knock from behind the private door. 3 sharp raps, evenly spaced. I set down my book and listened. Rule 7 said to respond with 3 knocks of my own and wait 60 seconds before opening. I stood up, walked to the door, and knocked 3 times on the painted wood. Then I counted Mississippi 1, Mississippi 2, Mississippi 3. At Mississippi 60, I turned the handle. The basement stairs descended into darkness that my desk lamp couldn't penetrate. Cool air drifted up, carrying the smell of old stone and something else. Something metallic and sharp that made me think of the inside of a soda can. "Hello?" I called down. No answer. But I could hear movement below, like someone walking across a dirt floor. "Is someone there?" The walking stopped. Then, from the darkness, came a voice I didn't recognize. Male, with a Kentucky accent thicker than molasses. "Just checking the foundation, son. Making sure everything's still holding up proper. Do you need any help?" A laugh echoed up from below. Not unkind, but tired. "Been doing this longer than you've been breathing, boy. But I appreciate the offer." The footsteps resumed, moving away from the stairs and fading into whatever space existed beneath the tavern. I waited another minute, then closed the door and locked it. Later, I'd wonder who was down there. Later, I'd realize the voice had sounded familiar, like I'd heard it in a history documentary, or maybe in the stories my grandfather used to tell about old Kentucky. But that night, I just returned to my book and tried to pretend that having conversations with basement-dwelling spirits was becoming routine. The Pattersons checked out Saturday morning without incident, though Linda mentioned the boys had complained about other children playing in the halls Friday night. I gave them a box of earplugs and a coupon for free breakfast next time they visited. As they loaded their car, Tyler ran back to the front desk. "Hey, mister," he said, looking around to make sure his parents weren't listening. "Last night I saw a lady in an old dress walking around upstairs. She looked sad. What did you do?" I waved at her. She waved back and kept walking. He grinned. "It was awesome." Smart kid. Rebecca would approve of his manners. Mary arrived at her usual time with coffee and a concerned expression. "Everything quiet?" she asked, but she was studying my face like she expected bad news. "Mostly. Clock stopped twice Thursday night. Someone was in the basement Friday, and the Patterson kids heard the laughter." She nodded slowly. "You handled it all correct?" "I think so." "Good." She poured herself coffee and settled behind the desk. "You're learning fast, Caleb. That's important because October's our busy season. More guests means more chances for things to go wrong." "What kind of wrong?" Mary's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The kind where we find out what happens when people don't follow the rules." Mary's prediction about October proved accurate. The next week brought a steady stream of ghost tour groups, bourbon enthusiasts, and couples looking for a romantic getaway in Kentucky's most haunted hotel. I was getting comfortable with the routine. Check people in, smile politely when they asked about paranormal activity, and keep the real rules to myself. That comfort ended Tuesday night when Roger Pemberton checked in. He was maybe 50, wearing an expensive leather jacket and the kind of confidence that comes from never hearing the word no. Drove up in a black Porsche with Indiana plates and immediately started complaining about the parking situation, the size of the lobby, and the fact that we didn't have a modern keycard system. "Roger Pemberton," he announced, sliding his credit card across the desk. "I've got a reservation." I checked the computer. "Yes, sir, room 3. One night. Checking out tomorrow?" "That's right. And I want room 7. I read online that it's where Jesse James stayed. I'm paying for the full experience." My fingers paused over the keyboard. "I'm sorry, Mr. Pemberton, but room 7 is occupied tonight." "Occupied by who?" "Your computer says I'm the only guest checking in. Sometimes our system doesn't update properly. Local couple. Booked it this afternoon." The lie came easily now. But room 3 has just as much history. Daniel Boone himself slept there. Pemberton's eyes narrowed. "I specifically requested room 7 when I made this reservation. I'm a travel blogger with 40,000 followers. One bad review from me could tank this place." "I understand your frustration, sir, but..." "Look, kid, He leaned across the desk, invading my space with cologne that probably cost more than my monthly salary. I drove 3 hours from Indianapolis for this. I want room 7, and I want it now. I thought about Mary's rules. Rule 2 is clear. If a guest asks for room 7, tell them it's occupied, even if it appears empty, especially if it appears empty. I really am sorry, Mr. Pemberton, but I can't accommodate that request. Room 3 is available, or I'd be happy to help you find accommodations elsewhere. He snatched his credit card back. This is ridiculous. What kind of backwater operation are you running here? The kind that's been operating successfully since 1779, sir. Pemberton grabbed his leather overnight bag and stomped toward the stairs. Room 3 better be spotless, or you'll be hearing from me. I processed his registration, printed his receipt, and hoped that would be the end of it. It wasn't. At 1:47 a.m., I heard footsteps on the second floor. Heavy, deliberate steps that belonged to someone who wanted to be heard. They moved from room 3 toward the end of the hall, then stopped. A door handle rattled, then another. Pemberton was trying room doors, looking for number 7. I grabbed the house phone and dialed room 3. It rang 6 times before Pemberton answered. What? Mr. Pemberton, this is the front desk. I need to ask you to return to your room, please. Other guests are trying to sleep. I'm looking for the bathroom. This place is a maze. The bathroom is attached to your room, sir. Each room has its own private facilities. A long pause. Then, right. Of course. Sorry. The line went dead, but the footsteps didn't return to room 3. Instead, they continued down the hall, stopping at what had to be room 7. I listened to the sound of a door opening, then closing. My stomach dropped. Room 7 wasn't locked from the outside. Mary had mentioned that months ago. The locks on these old doors were temperamental, and sometimes guests could jiggle them open even when they weren't supposed to. I sat there for 10 minutes, waiting for something to happen. Screaming, maybe, or the sound of Pemberton running back to his room. Instead, I heard nothing. At 2:15 a.m., the tavern room bell rang. Once. I stared at it, remembering Rule 1. Never enter the tavern room after 2 a.m. unless you hear the bell ring 3 times. If it rings once or twice, ignore it completely. The bell rang again. Twice total. I stayed at my desk. At 2:47 a.m., I heard Roger Pemberton screaming. Not words, just raw animal sounds of terror that echoed through the old building like gunshots. The screaming went on for maybe 30 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Silence returned to the tavern, heavy and expectant. I picked up the phone to call room 3, then set it down. Whatever was happening in room 7, Pemberton had brought it on himself. Mary's rules existed for a reason, and he'd chosen to ignore my warnings. But I couldn't just sit there. I grabbed the master key ring and headed upstairs, my heart hammering against my ribs. The hallway was dark, except for the emergency lighting that cast everything in a sickly green glow. Room 3's door stood open, Pemberton's overnight bag visible just inside the threshold. Room 7's door was closed. I pressed my ear against the wood and listened. Nothing. No breathing, no movement, no signs of life. Mr. Pemberton? I whispered. No response. I tried the handle. It turned easily, like the lock had never been engaged. The door swung open to reveal a room that looked exactly like the others. Antique bed, old wooden dresser, window overlooking the courtyard. Roger Pemberton sat in the chair beside the window, still wearing his leather jacket. His back was to me, his head tilted forward like he'd fallen asleep reading. "Sir, are you all right?" He didn't move. I walked around the chair to face him and immediately understood why he'd been screaming. Pemberton's eyes were gone. Not closed, not damaged. Gone. Empty sockets stared at nothing. Dark holes that seemed to go deeper than they should. His mouth hung open in a silent scream, and his hands gripped the chair arms with enough force to leave finger impressions in the old wood. But he was breathing. Slow, steady breaths that fogged the window beside him. I stumbled backward, trying to process what I was seeing. Pemberton was alive but hollow, like something had reached inside and scooped out everything that made him human. A voice spoke from the corner of the room, soft and sad. He wouldn't listen. I spun around to find Rebecca standing beside the dresser, her blue dress rustling like autumn leaves. Her dark eyes held centuries of sorrow, but her expression was patient. "I tried to warn him," she continued, "knocked on the walls, made the floorboards creak. He thought it was charming. Authentic atmosphere, he said." "What happened to him?" "Room 7 doesn't like visitors who force their way in. It tolerates guests who are invited, who show proper respect. But when someone breaks down the barriers..." She gestured toward Pemberton's empty face. "It takes what it's owed." "Is he going to be okay?" Rebecca's smile held no comfort. "Define okay, Caleb. His body will heal. His mind will recover mostly. But he'll never see again, and he'll never remember what took his sight. Small mercy, that. What do I do? Call 911. Tell them he had an accident. Slipped and fell, hit his head on something sharp. They'll find injuries consistent with that story." She began to fade, becoming translucent around the edges. "And Caleb? Don't feel guilty. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way." She disappeared, leaving me alone with the breathing statue that used to be Roger Pemberton. I pulled out my phone and dialed emergency services, already composing the story I'd tell them. Pemberton had been drinking. I'd smelled bourbon on his jacket when the paramedics arrived, though I couldn't explain how it got there. He'd stumbled, fallen against the old dresser, caught his face on a sharp corner. The EMTs would find scratches consistent with such an accident. The police would file a routine report. The hospital would treat his injuries and send him home with a disability rating and a story he'd never quite remember. Within an hour, the room was empty again. The crew had taken Pemberton to the University of Louisville Hospital, and I'd given my statement to a bored Bardstown police officer who seemed more interested in getting back to his patrol car than investigating what he clearly saw as a simple accident. I locked room 7 and returned to the front desk, where I found Mary waiting with a thermos of coffee and a box of tissues. "First time seeing someone win the hard way?" she asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It never gets easier. But remember, you tried to stop him. You followed the rules, did everything right. What happened to Mr. Pemberton was his choice, not yours." She was right, but it didn't make me feel better. I kept thinking about Pemberton's confidence, his certainty that money and influence could overcome any obstacle. 3 hours later, that confidence had cost him his sight and most of his memories. "Mary?" I said as she prepared to leave. "Has anyone ever successfully stayed in room 7? As a guest, I mean." She paused at the door. "Once. About 15 years ago. Sweet couple from Nashville celebrating their anniversary. They knocked first, asked permission out loud before entering. Room 7 liked their manners, I guess. They spent the night without incident." "And everyone else?" "Everyone else tried to take what wasn't freely given." She opened the door, letting in the first hints of dawn. Room 7 doesn't forget debts, Caleb. And it always collects what it's owed. After she left, I sat in the growing daylight and wondered how many other Roger Pembertons would check in during my tenure. How many people would ignore warnings, break rules, and pay prices they couldn't afford. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the corner, keeping time for the living and the dead alike. In a few hours, another night would begin, bringing new guests and new opportunities for things to go wrong. I was beginning to understand why Mary's family had been doing this job for 3 generations. Someone had to maintain the balance, to keep the rules that protected both the living and whatever claimed Room 7 as home. Someone had to make sure the debts got paid. The week following Roger Pemberton's accident brought an unusual calm to the tavern. Only 3 guests total, all quiet couples who followed instructions, stayed in their assigned rooms and checked out without incident. I began to think maybe I'd seen the worst of what the old building could dish out. I was wrong. Saturday night arrived with a bus tour from Cincinnati, 22 members of the Greater Ohio Paranormal Society, armed with EMF detectors, digital cameras, and enough enthusiasm to wake the actual dead. Their leader, a thin woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, had booked 6 rooms and specifically requested access to all documented supernatural hotspots. "We're serious researchers," she assured me during check-in, adjusting wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down her nose. "Not weekend thrill seekers. We follow proper protocols." If only she knew what proper protocols actually meant here. The group settled into rooms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. I made sure to mention that room 7 was undergoing maintenance and would be off limits during their stay. Dr. Vance seemed disappointed but didn't press the issue. By 10 p.m., they'd scattered throughout the building with their equipment, taking the electromagnetic readings and photographing every corner that looked remotely historical. I watched them through the security monitor Mary had installed after Pemberton's incident, making mental notes about who was where. 3 members were documenting the bullet holes in the tavern room. A husband and wife team had stationed themselves on the main staircase with a device that supposedly detected temperature fluctuations. The rest wandered the halls, speaking in hushed voices about energy signatures and residual hauntings. At 11:47 p.m., Rebecca made her usual appearance. She descended the stairs with her customary grace, blue dress swaying with each step. The husband and wife team saw her coming and immediately started taking pictures, their camera flash strobing like lightning. Rebecca paused mid-step, clearly irritated by the intrusion. Her dark eyes found mine across the lobby, and I could see the question there. What do I do about this? I remembered Rule 4. Nod politely and continue about your business. Do not speak to her. Do not follow her. But the rule didn't say anything about other people speaking to her. "Excuse me," called the wife, a plump woman in her 60s wearing a Ghost Hunter t-shirt. "Could we ask you a few questions? We're documenting paranormal activity in the building." Rebecca's expression shifted from irritation to something approaching amusement. She looked at me again, one eyebrow raised as if to say, "Well, this is new." I shrugged helplessly. The rules covered my behavior, not hers. Rebecca turned to face the paranormal investigators. When she spoke, her voice carried the soft drawl of antebellum Kentucky. "I'm afraid I'm rather busy this evening. Perhaps another time." The wife nearly dropped her camera. You can talk. Are you a residual spirit or an intelligent haunting? How long have you been here?" "About 200 years, give or take." Rebecca's tone remained polite, but distant. "And I really must be going. I'm looking for someone. She continued down the stairs and through the wall beside the front door, leaving the investigators staring at empty space. "Did you get that on camera?" the husband whispered. "Every second," his wife breathed. "This is incredible." At midnight, things started going sideways. The children's laughter began right on schedule, echoing through the upstairs hallway. But instead of treating it as background noise, the Paranormal Society members treated it like Christmas morning. I could hear them running through the halls, chasing sounds with their equipment. The EMF readings are off the charts. Temperature just dropped 15 degrees. I'm getting massive electromagnetic spikes. One of them banged on my door marked private, thinking it might be another guest room. The knocking came in sets of 4, then 5, then a long scratch that made my teeth hurt. According to Rule 7, I was supposed to respond with 3 knocks and wait 60 seconds if I heard knocking. But these weren't the measured raps from the basement entity. These were rapid, frantic pounds from someone very much alive. I ignored them and hoped whoever was down there would understand the difference. At 12:15 a.m., Dr. Vance approached my desk with her EMF detector beeping like a smoke alarm. "We're getting extraordinary readings throughout the building," she said, breathless with excitement. "Could you tell us about room 7? Our equipment is going crazy near that door." "Room 7 is off limits, as I mentioned during check-in. But surely, for research purposes..." "No exceptions, Dr. Vance. Insurance liability." She looked ready to argue when the grandfather clock stopped at 3:17 a.m. Wait, that wasn't right. It was only 12:15. I looked at the clock face again. The hands pointed to 3:17, but my watch said 12:15. The pendulum hung motionless, and the usual ticking had stopped. Rule 5 said to wind it immediately if it stopped at 3:17, regardless of the actual time. 12 full turns. No more, no less. "Excuse me," I told Dr. Vance, walking over to the clock. "Oh, wonderful," she called out. "The electromagnetic disturbance must be affecting the timepiece." I found the key and began winding. 1, 2, 3. Dr. Vance stood behind me with her detector, which was now beeping so rapidly it sounded like a dial-up modem. "The readings are incredible. Whatever's in this clock is extremely active." 7, 8, 9. The basement door rattled behind me. Not knocking. A low, rolling sound like someone was shaking the frame. 11, 12. The clock's pendulum resumed swinging, but the hands remained fixed at 3:17. Dr. Vance's EMF detector finally went quiet. "Fascinating," she murmured. "The entity seems to have retreated." The coffee pot started brewing in the kitchen, right on its usual schedule of 3:30 a.m., even though every clock in the building except the grandfather showed different times. The rich aroma of bacon followed shortly after, drifting through the lobby like a dinner invitation. 3 paranormal investigators immediately headed toward the kitchen. "Wait!" I called out. But they were already pushing through the swinging doors. I heard excited voices, cameras clicking, and then sudden silence. One of them stumbled back into the lobby, a young man with a goatee who looked like he'd seen something that challenged his worldview. There's nobody in there," he said, "but the bacon's cooking itself, in a pan that's floating 3 feet above the stove." The other 2 investigators emerged behind him, both looking shaken. The older man was filming everything with his phone, but his hands trembled so badly the footage would be useless. "We need to document this," Dr. Vance said, but she made no move toward the kitchen. The smell of bacon faded exactly 20 minutes later, just like always. When the investigators returned to the kitchen, they found only an empty stove and a lingering aroma of breakfast that never was. By 2 a.m., The Paranormal Society had packed up their equipment and retreated to their rooms. Dr. Vance approached my desk one final time, looking less like a confident researcher and more like someone who'd bitten off more than she could chew. "We've gathered enough material for tonight," she said. "But I have to ask, how do you do this job? How do you sit here every night, knowing what's in this building?" I thought about Pemberton's empty eye sockets, about Rebecca's patient sadness, about the voice in the basement that seemed older than Kentucky itself. "You learn the rules," I said, "and you follow them." She studied my face like she was trying to read a language she didn't recognize. "What rules?" "The important ones." Dr. Vance and her team checked out early the next morning, citing equipment malfunctions and promising to return with more advanced instruments. I helped them load their bus, noting how they kept glancing back at the tavern like it might follow them home. Mary arrived as the bus pulled away, carrying coffee and wearing the expression of someone who'd been expecting bad news. "How many rules did they try to break?" she asked. "Surprisingly few. Rebecca handled them well, and they mostly just observed." I paused. "But Mary, the clock stopped at 3:17 even though it was only midnight. Is that normal?" Her expression grew serious. "Time gets flexible here during busy periods. The building has its own rhythms, especially when there are too many people poking at things they don't understand." She studied the grandfather clock, which now showed the correct time. "You round it anyway. 12 turns, like the rule says." "Good. The rules don't change just because the circumstances get strange." She settled behind the desk and began organizing paperwork. "Though I have to say, Caleb, you're handling this better than most. 3 months in, and you haven't broken a single rule or lost a single guest." Pemberton wasn't my fault. No, it wasn't. And that's exactly why you're good at this job. You understand the difference between protecting people and controlling them. As I walked to my car that morning, I realized Mary was right. I was good at this job. The rules made sense now, not as arbitrary restrictions, but as a careful balance between the living world and whatever claimed the Old Talbott Tavern as home. The question was, how long could I maintain that balance before something tested me beyond my limits? 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday, everything changed. The day started normally enough. A retired teacher from Lexington checked into room 2, a bourbon distillery representative took room 4, and a young couple from Tennessee booked room 5 for their anniversary. Standard autumn tourism, the kind that paid the bills without causing supernatural incidents. I'd grown comfortable with the rhythm of my nights. Rebecca appeared at 11:47, the coffee pot started at 3:30, and the children's laughter echoed through the halls on schedule. Even the grandfather clock had been behaving itself, keeping proper time without stopping at 3:17. But comfort, I was learning, made you complacent. At 9:47 p.m., a man walked through the front door without opening it, not like Rebecca, who moved through the wall with the fluid grace of someone who'd been doing it for centuries. This man pushed through the solid oak door like it was made of mist, his form flickering between solid and translucent with each step. He wore a long coat that might have been brown or black. The color shifted depending on the angle of the light. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed most of his face, but I caught glimpses of sharp cheekbones and eyes that held the weight of violent years. Jesse James had come calling. I'd read about him in school, seen him portrayed in countless movies, but nothing had prepared me for the reality of his presence. He moved with the careful economy of someone who'd spent his life expecting bullets, and the air around him thrummed with barely contained energy. He surveyed the lobby, taking in the modernized checking desk, the security cameras, the electric lighting. His gaze lingered on me for a moment, then moved to the tavern room entrance. I remembered Rule 8. Offer him a drink. Bourbon, neat. "Good evening, Mr. James," I said, standing up from my desk. "Can I offer you something to drink?" His head turned toward me, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. Younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of beard that suggested grooming wasn't a priority. His eyes held intelligence, humor, and something darker that made my skin crawl. "Bourbon," he said. His voice carried a Missouri accent softened by years of moving through different territories. "Meat." I walked to the bar in the tavern room, acutely aware that it was 9:47 p.m., well before the 2 a.m. restriction in Rule 1. The tavern room felt different with Jesse in it, like the air had thickened. The bullet holes in the wall seemed to pulse with their own light. I poured 3 fingers of Maker's Mark into a glass and set it on the bar. Jesse materialized beside me without seeming to move, his coat settling around him like smoke. "Much obliged," he said, lifting the glass. He drank it in one smooth motion, then set a silver dollar on the bar with a soft clink. I pocketed the coin, making a mental note to add it to the collection in the safe later. "Anything else I can do for you, sir?" Jesse studied the bullet holes in the wall, running his fingers over the plaster. "Place has changed since I was here last. Cleaner, quieter." He glanced at me. "You the new night man?" "Yes, sir. Caleb Hutchins." Caleb. He tested the name like he was tasting wine. "You know why I'm here, Caleb?" "No, sir, I don't." "Something's coming. Something that don't belong, even by this place's standards." He walked to the window overlooking the courtyard, his reflection barely visible in the glass. "I can feel it gathering, like storm clouds before a twister." "You ever see a twister, Caleb?" "Once, when I was a kid, near Elizabethtown. Then you know how the air gets before one hits. Heavy, wrong, makes your teeth ache and your skin crawl." He turned back to me. "That's what's building here, and when it breaks, you're going to need more than your little list of rules." Before I could ask what he meant, Jesse James faded away like morning mist, leaving only the empty glass and the lingering smell of gunpowder. I stood alone in the tavern room, processing what he'd told me. Something was coming, something that didn't belong. At 11:30 p.m., I found out what. A black SUV pulled into the parking lot with its headlights off. 2 men in dark suits got out, moving with the kind of coordination that suggested military training. They approached the front door, and I could see government credentials in their hands before they'd even reached the desk. "Evening," said the taller one, a man with graying temples and the build of someone who spent time in hotel gyms. "Agent Morrison, FBI. This is Agent Chen. We need to speak with whoever's in charge." I felt my heart rate spike. "The owner isn't here right now. I'm the night manager. Is there something I can help you with?" Agent Chen, younger with dark hair and suspicious eyes, pulled out a tablet and showed me a photograph. "We're looking for this individual. Our sources suggest he may have been seen in this area." The photo showed a man in his 40s with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to look right through the camera. Something about his face made my stomach turn, though I couldn't put my finger on why. "I don't recognize him," I said truthfully. "When was he supposedly seen here?" 3 days ago, Morrison replied. "He's wanted in connection with several missing persons cases across the Midwest. Extremely dangerous. If you see him, do not approach. Call us immediately." They left their cards and returned to their SUV, but instead of driving away, they parked across the street where they could watch the tavern entrance. I'd dealt with law enforcement before, the Bardstown police officer after Pemberton's incident, but these agents felt different. Their presence created an electric tension that made my skin prickle, like the air before Jesse's twister. At 11:47 p.m., Rebecca appeared as usual, but she paused at the bottom of the stairs when she saw me. "You look troubled," she said. I glanced toward the window, where the FBI agent's SUV was barely visible. "Some federal agents came by, looking for someone. They're watching the building now." Rebecca's expression darkened. "What did they show you?" "A photograph?" "Yeah. A man with hollow cheeks and strange eyes. They said he was connected to missing persons cases." "Oh, Caleb." Rebecca's voice carried 2 centuries of sorrow. "They're not FBI agents, and that man they're hunting, he's already here." My blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "The entity they're tracking feeds on suffering, on fear. It takes human form to hunt, but it can't maintain the illusion perfectly. The hollow look, the wrong eyes, those are tells." She moved closer, her blue dress rustling. "And the things claiming to be federal agents? There's something else entirely. Something that's been chasing their prey for a very long time." "What are they?" "Cleaners, fixers, things that exist to cover up what regular people shouldn't see." Rebecca glanced toward the window. "They'll burn this place down if they have to, Caleb, with everyone inside." Before I could respond, the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in that familiar sickly green glow. The grandfather clock stopped at 3:17, even though it was barely midnight. And from upstairs came the sound of children laughing, but wrong, distorted, like a recording played at the wrong speed. The fake FBI agents were already moving toward the building. "Rebecca," I said, but she was gone. The front door opened, and Morrison stepped inside with his weapon drawn. Chen followed, carrying something that looked like a cross between a tablet and a Geiger counter. "Sir, I need you to step away from the desk," Morrison said. "We have reason to believe a fugitive has taken refuge in this building." I raised my hand slowly. "I told you, I haven't seen anyone matching that description." "Readings are off the charts," Chen muttered, staring at his device. "Multiple entities present, high-level manifestations." Morrison's radio crackled to life. "Control, this is Morrison. We're inside the target building, confirming multiple supernatural signatures, requesting immediate cleanup authorization." Cleanup authorization. Rebecca was right. They were going to burn the place down. The children's laughter grew louder, joined now by other sounds. Footsteps in the walls, doors slamming. The coffee pot started brewing even though it was only midnight, and the smell of bacon began drifting from the kitchen. Chen's device started beeping frantically. "Sir, we've got massive activity. Multiple Class 4 entities, at least one Class 5. That's when I realized the truth. The man in the photograph, the one they were hunting, he wasn't some serial killer. He was bait. The real trap was the tavern itself, and these things wearing human faces were here to destroy it. They were here to destroy Rebecca, the children in the walls, the voice in the basement, and Jesse James himself. Everything that made the Old Talbott Tavern what it was. The basement door rattled behind me, not knocking, a steady rhythmic pounding like someone trying to break out. "Stand down, civilian," Morrison barked. "This is now a federal crime scene." I thought about Mary's rules, about the careful balance she and her family had maintained for 3 generations, about Rebecca searching for someone for 200 years, about the children who'd never found peace. about Jesse James warning me that something was coming. The rules had protected everyone for decades, but the rules didn't cover this situation. I had a choice to make: follow Morrison's orders and watch them destroy everything I'd sworn to protect, or break the one rule that superseded all others: do what you're told by people in authority. The basement door exploded open. A figure emerged from the darkness below. Tall, gaunt, wearing clothes that might have been fashionable a century ago. His face was exactly like the photograph the agents had shown me. All hollow cheeks and eyes that reflected light like an animal's. But he wasn't the predator they'd described. He was running from something much worse. "They're not human," he gasped, pointing at Morrison and Chen. "They're cleaners. They find places like this and—" Morrison shot him 3 times in the chest. The bullets passed through him like he was made of mist, and he collapsed on the floor, flickering between solid and transparent. "Target neutralized," Morrison said into his radio. "Beginning facility sterilization." Chen pulled out what looked like a military-grade incendiary device. That's when I made my choice. I grabbed the box of unspent bullets from under the bar, the ones Mary used for Jesse's bullet holes, and started loading them into every fresh hole I could find in the tavern room wall. Not because a rule told me to, but because I finally understood what they were for. Each bullet I placed made the building hum with energy. The lights came back on. The grandfather clock started ticking again, and from every corner of the tavern came the sound of old debts being called in. Morrison and Chen weren't FBI agents, but they had made a critical error. They'd brought weapons into a place where violence had very specific rules of its own. The moment I placed the final bullet, the Old Talbott Tavern woke up. Not metaphorically, literally. The building itself came alive with 244 years of accumulated memory, anger, and protective instinct. The wooden floors creaked in rhythm like a heartbeat. The walls hummed with energy that made my teeth ache. Every piece of original timber, every hand-forged nail, every stone in the foundation responded to the call I had unknowingly issued. Morrison spun toward me, his weapon trained on my chest. Step away from the wall. Now. "I don't think so," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. Chen's device was going haywire, beeping and shrieking like a smoke detector in a house fire. "Sir, the readings are off the scale. We need to evacuate and call for backup." "Negative. Mission parameters haven't changed." Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. "Terminate all entities. Sterilize the location." That's when Jesse James materialized between us. He didn't fade in like before. He snapped into existence with the crack of displaced air, his long coat billowing around him like storm clouds. This time, he was solid, real, and he was armed. "Now that," Jesse said, drawing a Colt revolver that gleamed like it had just been cleaned, "is poor manners. You don't point guns at working folks." Morrison fired 3 rounds center mass. Jesse took the hits without flinching, the bullets passing through him and embedding themselves in the wall behind. Each new hole began bleeding a dark substance that smelled like cordite and old copper. "My turn," Jesse said. His first shot took Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him around. The bullet was real enough. I could see blood spreading across the fake agent's shirt. But Morrison didn't cry out or stumble. He just straightened up and returned fire, moving with mechanical precision that no human could maintain. Chen abandoned his device and pulled out the incendiary, a cylindrical object covered in switches and blinking lights. 30 seconds to ignition, he announced to no one in particular. Rebecca appeared beside the front desk, no longer the patient, sorrowful woman I had grown accustomed to. Her blue dress seemed to ripple within her light, and her dark eyes held the fury of someone who'd watched her home threatened one too many times. "Get away from my family," she said. The children's laughter exploded from the walls, not the playful sounds I'd learned to ignore, but something fierce and wild. The emergency lighting began strobing, and shadows raced across the ceiling like living things. From upstairs came the sound of doors slamming in rapid succession, growing louder and more violent with each impact. Chen tried to activate the incendiary device, but his hands passed through it like it was made of mist. He grabbed for it again, and again his fingers found nothing but air. "What the hell?" The voice from the basement answered him, drifting up through the floorboards with the weight of centuries. "This is our home, boy. Has been since before your kind learned to walk upright. You want to burn it down?" A sound like distant thunder rolled through the building. "You'll have to go through all of us first." The grandfather clock began chiming midnight, even though every other timepiece in the building showed different hours. With each chime, more spirits appeared. A woman in a white apron who might have been a cook. A man in a Union Army uniform with a hole through his chest. A little girl holding a rag doll, her dress singed around the edges, like she died in a fire. The tavern room filled with the dead, and they were angry. Morrison and Chen found themselves surrounded by 2.5 centuries of guests who'd never truly checked out. The fake agents opened fire, their weapons discharging round after round into phantoms that laughed at bullets and closed in with hands that could suddenly touch, grab, and hold. I watched Morrison struggle against the grip of 3 Civil War soldiers, while Chen tried to fend off the little girl with the burned dress. She'd latched onto his leg with surprising strength, and her touch was leaving frost patterns on his pants. "Caleb!" Rebecca called out. "The safe. You need to count the coins." Rule 8. If there are ever 13 coins, call the number immediately. But Jesse had just outed 1 tonight, and I hadn't counted the total yet. I ran to the safe behind the front desk, spinning the combination Mary had taught me. Inside, along with the night's cash deposits and guest registration forms, sat a small wooden box containing Jesse's silver dollars. I dumped them onto the desk and counted quickly. 12 coins, including the one from tonight. Not 13. 12, I called out. "Count again," Rebecca said. "Look closer." I spread the coins across the desk, examining each one. They were all similar. Silver dollars from different years, some newer than others, all bearing the patina of age and handling. But as I looked closer, I noticed something odd about the newest coin. It was still warm, and it was changing. As I watched, the silver began to tarnish around the edges, turning black, like it was being burned from within. The face on the coin, Lady Liberty, seemed to writhe and shift, her features becoming gaunt and hollow. Like the man in the photograph, the entity the cleaners had been hunting. 13, I whispered. The coin split in half with a sound like breaking glass. From inside it crawled something that might have once been human, but had been twisted by decades of feeding on fear and suffering. The hollow-cheeked man from the FBI photograph pulled himself free of the silver dollar, growing to full size in seconds. He looked around the chaos-filled tavern room with eyes that reflected light like mirrors. "Finally," he said, in a voice like grinding bone. I was getting cramped in there. Morrison and Chen stopped struggling against their ghostly captors. Both cleaners turned toward the newly emerged entity with expressions of pure hatred. "Target acquired," Morrison said, "initiating termination protocol." But the entity just laughed. "You can't kill something that's already dead, boys, and you sure as hell can't contain something that belongs here." That's when I understood. The hollow-cheeked man wasn't the predator the cleaners had described. He was a spirit, like Rebecca and Jesse and all the others. He'd been trapped in the silver dollar, used as bait to draw the cleaners to places like the tavern. The cleaners weren't hunting him. They were using him. How many? I asked Rebecca. How many places like this have they destroyed? Dozens, she said sadly. Maybe hundreds. They find locations where the veil is thin, where spirits can manifest. They use him as a lure, then burn everything down and claim it was a gas leak or electrical fire. The entity turned to me with something approaching gratitude. Young man, I believe you have a phone call to make. I pulled out the number Mary had written below Rule 8 and dialed. It rang once before a familiar voice answered. Whitfield residence. Mary, it's Caleb. We have 13 coins. On my way, she said and hung up. The cleaners had broken free of their ghostly restraints and were advancing on the entity with weapons that definitely weren't standard FBI issue. Some kind of electric prod that crackled with blue energy, designed specifically for dealing with supernatural entities. Jesse stepped between them, his Colt trained on Morrison's head. Now see, that's where you made your mistake. You brought the wrong kind of guns to the wrong kind of fight. Stand down, entity, Morrison commanded. You have no authority here. No authority? Jesse's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. Son, I've been robbing and killing for longer than you've been pretending to be human. This is my house, these are my people, and you just threatened my bartender. He shot Morrison through the head. The bullet took off the top of the cleaner's skull, revealing circuitry and wiring instead of brain matter. Sparks flew from the wound, and Morrison's face began flickering between human features and something metallic underneath. Androids, Rebecca breathed. They're not even alive. Chen raised his electric weapon toward Jesse, but the Civil War soldiers were already moving. They tackled the android to the ground, their ghostly hands somehow solid enough to pin him down. Smoke rose from where they touched him, like iron-burning spirit flesh. But they held on. The little girl with the burned dress climbed onto Chen's chest and looked directly into his mechanical eyes. You hurt my friends, she said in a voice like crackling flames. Now you burn. Chen's android body began to smoke, then smolder, then burst into flames that burned blue-white and smelled like melting plastic. Morrison followed seconds later, his disguise failing completely as his mechanical components overloaded. Within minutes, both cleaners had been reduced to piles of ash and twisted metal. The entity that had emerged from the 13th coin knelt beside the remains, sifting through them with his fingers. They'll send more, he said. They always do. Let them come, Jesse replied, reloading his Colt with movements too fast to follow. We'll be ready. The front door burst open, and Mary Whitfield rushed in, carrying a shotgun that looked older than the building itself. She took in the scene, the destroyed androids, the assembled spirits, me standing behind the front desk with silver dollars scattered everywhere, and nodded like this was exactly what she'd expected. Everyone all right? She asked. Define all right, I said, my voice shaking now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Mary walked over to the pile of ash that had been Morrison and kicked it with her boot. Metal components scattered across the floor. Government's been trying to shut down places like this for years. They don't understand what we do here, so they want to eliminate it. She looked around at the assembled spirits, then at me. Caleb, I need to ask you something important. After tonight, after seeing all this, do you still want this job? I thought about my old life in Louisville, selling insurance and driving a leased BMW, about the divorce papers and the downsizing and my father's cancer bills. About 3 months ago, when my biggest concern was making my quota and impressing supervisors who didn't give a damn about me. Then I looked at Rebecca, still glowing faintly in her blue dress, at Jesse James, who'd taken bullets to protect me, at the little girl with the burned dress, who'd risked herself to destroy our enemies. "Yeah," I said. "I want the job." Mary smiled. Good, because this was just the beginning. The cleanup took 3 hours. Mary produced a shop vacuum from the maintenance closet and methodically sucked up every trace of android remains while I gathered the scattered silver dollars. The spirits had faded back to their usual haunts, but I could feel them watching from the shadows, alert for signs of new threats. The entity that had emerged from the 13th coin, who introduced himself as Ezra Blackwood, former Confederate deserter turned Union spy, helped us search for any surveillance devices the cleaners might have left behind. We found 3. Tiny cameras disguised as wood screws in the front door frame, a listening device stuck under my desk, and a signal transmitter hidden in the grandfather clock's weight compartment. "They've been watching for weeks," Mary said, crushing the transmitter under her boot heel. "Probably triggered by the Paranormal Society's equipment. All that electromagnetic scanning must have lit up their sensors like a Christmas tree." Ezra examined the remains of the cameras with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years evading government surveillance. "These are military grade. Whatever organization sent those androids, they have serious funding." "Who are they exactly?" I asked. "Government? Private contractors?" Mary and Ezra exchanged a look that suggested they knew more than they were saying. "Both. Neither. It's complicated," Mary said finally. "There are people in positions of power who believe places like this represent a threat to, let's call it the established order. They can't control what they don't understand, and they can't understand what died before they were born." She walked to the tavern room wall and ran her fingers over the bullet holes, including the fresh ones from tonight's battle. "My grandmother used to tell stories about men in black suits who came around during World War II, asking questions about unusual activities at historic sites. Most places caved to the pressure and shut down. We didn't. What makes us different?" "We have allies," Ezra said. "The dead don't vote, but they remember. And some of us have been paying attention to the living world longer than others." As if summoned by his words, Rebecca appeared in the doorway. Her blue dress looked normal again, no longer glowing with protective fury, but her dark eyes held new resolve. "Caleb," she said, "there's something you need to see." She led us upstairs to the second floor, past the guest rooms to a door I'd never noticed before. It was painted the same color as the walls, with no number or marking to distinguish it from the wooden paneling. "Roommate," Rebecca said, producing an old brass key from somewhere in her dress. "The room that doesn't exist." She unlocked the door and stepped aside. Beyond the threshold lay a space that definitely hadn't been there when I'd toured the building 3 months ago. It was larger than the other guest rooms, with windows that looked out onto a view of Bardstown, but seemed wrong somehow. Too bright, too detailed, like someone had painted it from memory rather than observation. The room was furnished with a desk, several filing cabinets, and walls covered with maps, photographs, and documents. Red string connected various points across the maps, creating a web that stretched from Kentucky to California to Maine. "Welcome to the real headquarters," Mary said. "The Whitfield family hasn't just been running this tavern for 3 generations. We've been coordinating with other locations, sharing information, keeping track of which places are under threat. I studied the wall maps more closely. Each red pin marked a location, and many of them had dates written beside them in red ink. The Myrtles plantation in Louisiana, Compromised 2019. The Stanley Hotel in Colorado, under surveillance. A dozen other sites I didn't recognize, scattered across the country like nodes in a network. "This is bigger than I thought," I said. "Much bigger," Ezra agreed. He'd been dead for over a century, but he navigated the filing cabinets like he'd helped organize them. The war between the living and the dead isn't new, Caleb. It's just becoming more sophisticated. He pulled out a thick folder labeled Project Tabula Rasa and spread photographs across the desk. Images of burned buildings, newspaper headlines about gas explosions and electrical fires, official reports stamped with government seals. 47 historic locations destroyed in the past 5 years, he said. All of them places where spirits could manifest, where the boundaries between worlds were thin. The official explanations always sound reasonable. Faulty wiring, gas leaks, arson by vandals. I picked up one of the photographs. It showed the smoldering ruins of what might have been a grand Victorian mansion. The caption read, "Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Louisville, Kentucky, electrical fire, total loss." "Waverly Hills burned down?" I asked. I've driven past it 100 times during my years in Louisville, always meaning to take the ghost tour but never getting around to it. 2 years ago, Mary said quietly. 300 spirits, gone in one night. The cleaners claimed it was a safety hazard due to asbestos contamination. The weight of what I was seeing settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about the Old Talbott Tavern. There was a systematic campaign to eliminate every place where the supernatural world touched our own. "What's the end game?" I asked. "What happens when they've destroyed all the haunted places?" "Control," Rebecca said simply. "If the dead can't manifest, can't communicate, can't affect the physical world, then death becomes final, absolute. No more warnings from beyond the grave, no more justice for unsolved murders, no more comfort for the grieving. And no more accountability for those in power," Ezra added. "Hard to cover up atrocities when the victims might come back to tell their stories." Mary closed the folder and returned it to its filing cabinet. "That's why places like this matter, Caleb. We're not just tourist attractions or historical curiosities. We're refugee camps for the dead, embassies between worlds." "So, what do we do now?" "They'll send more cleaners." "They will," Mary agreed, "but they'll be more careful next time. Tonight proved that we can fight back, that the spirits here won't go quietly. That changes the equation." She walked to the window and looked out at the painted view of Bardstown. "There are other families like ours, other guardians at other locations. We've been operating independently for too long, keeping our heads down, hoping they wouldn't notice us." "Time to stop hiding," Ezra said. Rebecca nodded. "Time to coordinate our defenses." Mary turned back to us with the expression of someone who'd made a difficult decision. "Caleb, I'm going to ask something of you that goes way beyond the job description. Are you willing to learn more than just the 8 rules? Are you willing to help us contact the other sites, to become part of something larger?" I thought about my old life again, about selling insurance policies to people who'd never need them and driving to offices where I was just another replaceable cog in a corporate machine. Then I thought about tonight, about standing with Jesse James and Rebecca against enemies that wanted to erase them from existence. What would I need to do? Learn the real history of this place, not the tourist version, but the truth about why certain spirits choose to remain, why some locations become sanctuaries while others fade into nothing. She gestured toward the filing cabinets. "Study the patterns, understand the network, help us communicate with our allies." And if the cleaners come back, then we fight them again, Jesse James said from the doorway. I hadn't heard him approach, but he stood there solid as life, his Colt holstered but ready. But next time, we'll be prepared. He walked into room 8 like he'd been there before, which he probably had. The boy did good tonight, Mary. Chose the right side when it mattered. That counts for something. It counts for everything, Rebecca said, smiling at me. You could have run when the shooting started. Could have let them burn us out and found another job. Instead, you stood with us. I realized they were right. 3 months ago, I would have run. Would have called the real FBI and let someone else deal with supernatural problems. But somewhere between learning the rules and watching Rebecca search for her lost love, between hearing children's laughter in empty halls and sharing drinks with a dead outlaw, I'd stopped being just an employee. I'd become part of the family. Where do we start? I asked. Mary smiled and pulled out a much thicker folder labeled Network Communications. With these, coded messages from 17 other locations, all reporting increased surveillance, unusual incidents, signs that the cleaners are expanding their operations. She spread the papers across the desk. Letters written in careful handwriting, emails printed on hotel stationery, even a few telegrams that shouldn't have been possible to send in 2024, but somehow arrived anyway. Each location has its own rules, its own spirits, its own way of maintaining the balance, she explained. But we all face the same threat. The time for independence is over. I picked up a letter postmarked from Savannah, Georgia. The return address read, Marshall House Hotel, Night Manager. The message was brief. Cleaners probing defenses. Lost 2 spirits to containment devices. Request guidance. J. Morrison, the real one. Another note, this one from Salem, Massachusetts. Witch house under 24/7 surveillance. Federal agents claiming historical research. Need emergency protocols. Sarah Bishop. How long have you been getting these? I asked. 6 months, Mary said. Right around the time you started working here. Your hiring wasn't coincidence, Caleb. We needed someone who could learn fast, adapt to changing circumstances, and handle pressure without breaking. Someone who could be trusted with the truth. Rebecca added. I looked around room 8, at the maps and files and evidence of a secret war being fought in the shadows of American history. At Mary, who'd inherited more than just a family business. At Ezra, who'd been fighting this battle for over a century. At Rebecca, still searching for her lost love after 200 years. At Jesse James, who'd put aside his outlaw past to protect this place. My family now, my responsibility. Okay, I said, let's get to work. Dawn was breaking over Bardstown by the time we finished going through the files. I had names and addresses for 43 supernatural locations across the country, plus contact information for their guardians. More importantly, I had a purpose that went beyond just following rules and checking in guests. The Old Talbott Tavern wasn't just a haunted hotel anymore. It was headquarters for a resistance movement I was only beginning to understand. As the first tourists of the day began arriving for breakfast, we sealed room 8 and returned to our normal routines. But everything had changed. The rules were still important. But now I knew they were just the beginning. The telegram arrived on a Tuesday evening, delivered by a courier who claimed to work for Western Union, despite the fact that they'd stopped offering telegram services years ago. I tipped him $5 and watched him disappear into the Bardstown twilight like he'd never existed. Chateau Marmont compromised, stop 3 spirits lost, stop cleaners using new containment tech, stop need backup protocols, stop Elena Rodriguez, night manager. I showed the message to Mary, who was reviewing reservations for the upcoming Bourbon Festival weekend. Her expression darkened as she read. Los Angeles, she said. That's the third West Coast location this month. I walked to the hidden panel beside the grandfather clock and retrieved the secure satellite phone we'd installed after the cleaner attack. Elena Rodriguez answered on the first ring. Talbott Tavern, this is Caleb. We got your message. Thank God. Her voice carried exhaustion and fear. They hit us at 3 a.m. with some kind of electromagnetic net, scooped up our 3 residents like they were catching butterflies. I've never seen anything like it. Are you safe? For now. But they left surveillance equipment everywhere. I think they're planning to come back. I looked at Mary, who nodded, and pulled out our emergency protocols folder. Elena, we're sending you the frequency disruptor blueprints. Jesse's been working with our electrician friend in Louisville to build countermeasures. You should be able to construct one with parts from any electronics store. Jesse James is helping with electronics? I smiled despite the circumstances. Death is a surprisingly good teacher. He's picked up a lot of skills over the years. After I hung up, Rebecca appeared beside the front desk, her blue dress shimmering in the lobby lighting. How many does that make this week? 7, I said, updating the status board we'd hidden behind the tourist information rack. But we've also had 3 new locations make contact. Word is spreading that resistance is possible. The front door chimed, and a young couple entered carrying backpacks and guidebooks, standard Bourbon Trail tourists, but I'd learned to look deeper. The woman kept glancing at the bullet holes in the tavern room wall with recognition rather than curiosity. The man's eyes lingered on Rebecca, who was still visible near the desk. Welcome to the Old Talbott Tavern, I said. Checking in? Actually, the woman said, we're looking for the night manager. Sarah Bishop from Salem sent us. I felt my pulse quicken. Sarah Bishop ran the Witch House, one of our most important allied locations. I'm the night manager, Caleb Hutchins. The man pulled out a folded piece of paper with handwriting I recognized from our network correspondence. She said you'd understand this. The note was brief. Caleb, these are the Hendersons. They've been managing the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River. Cleaners hit them last week. They need sanctuary and training. Trust them. S. Bishop. I looked at the young couple with new eyes. Refugees from another supernatural battleground, looking for guidance and protection. Exactly what the Old Talbott Tavern had become, a safe haven for both the living and the dead. Mary, I called to the back office. We're going to need roommates set up for orientation. She emerged with the thick folder containing our network protocols. New allies? New family, I corrected. As I led the Hendersons upstairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the antique mirror beside the staircase. The insurance salesman from Louisville was gone, replaced by someone who belonged in this strange world of rules and spirits and secret wars. My reflection looked older, more confident, like I'd finally found the job I was meant to do. The grandfather clock chimed midnight as we reached the second floor. Right on schedule, the children's laughter echoed through the halls, and the coffee pots started brewing in the kitchen. Normal sounds now, comforting in their familiarity. Jesse James materialized at the top of the stairs, his Colt holstered, but his hand resting on the grip. Everything all right, Caleb? Everything's perfect, I said, just bringing new recruits up to speed. He tipped his hat to the Hendersons. Welcome to the Resistance, folks. Hope you're ready to learn some rules. Behind us, Rebecca began her nightly search, and somewhere in the basement, footsteps echoed across dirt floors that hadn't existed for decades. The Old Talbott Tavern settled into its evening rhythm, keeping time for the living and the dead, while guardians old and new prepared for whatever tomorrow might bring. Some jobs, I'd learned, were worth more than money. Some rules were worth following to the end, and some families were worth dying for.